And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO at Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on the podcast, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is Ken Banta. He's the founder and CEO of the Vanguard Network and focuses on developing high-performance leaders, building high-performance organizations, and he's an advisor to leadership and executive teams, and he's been involved in over 11 global mergers, which I'm sure that in and of itself is lots of stories in there, but welcome aboard today, Ken. How are you?
Well, thanks, Peter, and thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So, how did all this happen? How did tell me a little bit about your journey, your path vis-a-vis thought leadership.
Yeah, well, so I started out actually doing graduate work at Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar, as it happens, and from there I got recruited to work for Time Magazine, and I kind of serendipitously ended up covering Eastern Europe for them before all the revolutions began. I think they thought they were sending me to a sort of quiet backwater, and the minute I got there, it went crazy, and so I was really lucky to be part of a unique time in history, and I covered that for almost more than 5 years. Then I was employed with them, and then I went into consulting for a while in public affairs. I'd say both those things kind of developed a sense of being able to get to the heart of things fairly quickly, to be able to analyze situations. I then got recruited in to be the head of corporate affairs for what turned out to be a train wreck of a merger between Pharmacia Corporation of Sweden and Company of the U.S., a big disaster. Happened to land with a really phenomenal CEO, Fred Hassan, and really
Yeah.
spent the next 15 years, I guess, practically working with him and a team of other people turning things around. And so those mergers, acquisitions, transformations that you mentioned were all on that watch. And I think, the two big things that came out of that work, Peter, were first of all, an appreciation for what, really good leadership can do, and also how to get change to happen in organizations. And obviously the two things are connected. And so that really led the way to Vanguard, the group that we have today. Several of those people I worked with, including Fred, had said, well, you've had so much experience in this area. Why don't you consider putting it to work with others? And that's really what we did from 2014 onward to today.
Yeah, so in terms of the Vanguard Network, it's really a community. Is it a fair statement?
Yeah, I think it's, what I think sets it apart from most conferences and other types of activities is it's a membership organization. And also it's totally devoted to leadership. So it's not about anything else,
Yeah.
which becomes more and more important the higher up you go. It's somewhat of a neglected topic, though everyone talks about it, but no one really gets deep into how you do it. And so our work is entirely focused on that. And it's not really a didactic type of thing with lecturers
Sure.
and podiums. We have it's really peer to peer. So we have something coming up on Monday with some of our network of CEOs in the life sciences space, and it'll be 6 sessions of them really leading the discussion about what matters to them. We make it happen.
Yeah.
They run it. They're it.
So stay there for a minute because what I'm thinking about as you're talking is lots of thought leaders wonder, well, what's a good modality? What's a format? What's a good vehicle for my stuff? And there are the obvious answers. I should write a book. I should be a keynoter. I could do a workshop. And I think that they often either aren't aware of or don't think about or whatever the power of using the core intellectual property, the thought leadership you have as the foundation of a peer-to-peer network. It's not a new idea, right? To do that, but I think people underestimate the value, in terms of, what are people looking for? There are times I wanna be taught, and I wanna take in some information and say, "Okay, I got that. Check the box, don't really need so much more." But what I find in my experience is peer-to-peer groups, especially when they're aligned to a certain type of thought leadership, really are there to support the burden isn't on Ken to say, "Uh-oh, I've got a meeting next week. What will I teach them?" It's a facilitated process, right? And there's an expectation of the other members that they're there to support one another and help one another and all those sort of things. Can you talk about some of the transformative experiences that some of the members have as a result of being in a group like this?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I think that's exactly right. And I'd say that the feedback we get about the Vanguard network is that not only is it peer to peer, but it's done in such a way that it is sort of genuinely a conversation among leaders and not a kind of peroration by somebody who pretends to be having a conversation, but it's really about them. And, we all know that type where the question takes longer than the response because they have so much to say about it. So what we really do is make sure that the members are the ones who are the stars of the show. Some concrete things, that come out of it. One of our GC leaders, a very, very impressive guy, multiple GC over multiple companies. I asked him that question, "What do you get out of this?" And he said, "It's really two things very often. One thing is that I learned something, a new one or two new things from my peers, which he said, by the time you've been doing what I'm doing for as long as I had, to get even one new thing out of a week is remarkable." And he said, finding
Right.
two in 5 hours with this organization is astonishing. And then the second thing he said is you really can't underestimate how valuable it is for people in my position to have a recognition that others have the same problem I have, or they're
Right.
grappling with, or they don't have an answer to a certain thing. He said, I can't tell you how many times I go to in front of my board or to the CEO, and they're saying, well, why can't we solve that? Why isn't there an instant answer? And he said, it's incredibly valuable to be able to say, on this particular one, Mr. Board Chair, 7 other GCs have the same problem we're having here. So my feeling is that we don't wanna presume we know more than all of them. And
So a
and
couple
that
of things.
he uses
So
those.
yeah, so they could be transparent and vulnerable
Yeah.
because it's probably not a good idea for a GC to be running around, back at the office saying, "I don't know, I'm not sure.
Right.
I've never seen that before." Like, even if it's true,
Yeah, you
just
maybe don't wanna be out there on a limb on your own, yeah.
yeah. One of the other things I think is beneficial to these sort of communities, these peer-to-peer groups, these masterminds, call them what you will, is it also gives the thought leader consistent fodder for, creating new thought leadership. Like, wow, you might be like, everybody's AI today, so maybe GCs are having a struggle with how to deal with AI or whatever it is. It gives you a tap into what's really going on in the real world today that you can think about and go, "Wow, that question that, Sam asked last week, that's really interesting. I'm gonna write an article about that," or it leads me to think about a different way to use my thought leadership. So I think it's kind of a cool ecosystem there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, and, I use this ecosystem of people or leverage it myself in, the things I post on LinkedIn. I just, finished a book called, Seeing Around Corners, which is a
Yeah,
compendium of points of view from many of our members. But it's kind of collated by me. So the implication, which is
sure,
correct, is that I chose them. I mean, these are not just random thoughts. These are thoughts
sure.
I were really relevant. So it's a kind of a second level thought leadership, if you like. And then, we have a number of genuine sort of thought leadership types, people who are expert in their realm joining some of these meetings, but they join in a certain way. They never give a speech. They never give a
Sure.
presentation. They're there just like you. They may be sitting near the front of the room to kind of start a conversation, but they don't have a bunch of papers they're reading from. They do not get to present PowerPoint slides. So it really changes the dynamic. They become part of the room, but they become a part of the room that has a particular area of knowledge. And I'll give you one example. Debevoise and Plimpton are partners of ours, so they're there on a regular basis. They're never lecturing on anything. What they're doing is they're often giving a case study. They're leading a discussion around a particular type of problem. And what I said to the group is that, everyone in this room is probably an N of one on most problems, like a cyber attack or an AI problem or a CEO that went off the road. They've seen 10, 20, 100 of those. And so when, for example, Mark Goodman, the head of their healthcare practice, is talking about something, he's giving you the benefit of, the 10, the 20, the 30 experiences, but he's not doing it in a lecturing way. He's doing it in response to a question. Someone says, so Mark, in your experience, what did you find was the biggest mistake people made in this particular situation of, for example, maybe a big mistake with the FDA, serious error in judgment and how to approach the FDA, possible ethical lapse and how they did things. He'd say, well, I've seen about 10 or 15 of these. And so my feeling is,
Right.
the thing that I see happening again and again is, denial or demand that to correct the FDA. And he's say, that certain things work, certain things don't. So that's the kind of thing he
Yeah.
brings to the party, but he's not bringing it in to the party in a lecturing sort of way.
And it doesn't have an agenda.
If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership,
Please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave a 5-star review
at ratethispodcast.com/LTL and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcasts and on all major listening apps, as well as at thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcast.
So I want to test this idea that I've had with you,
Yeah.
if I might. So I think, again, I'm talking about sort of these peer-to-peer groups, these masterminds, et cetera, that there's three primary value props that they offer to the members. Why am I spending my time and the firm's money here, right?
Yeah.
Content, right? That's probably why I would justify it on a budget, or if I had to justify it to my boss. There's great information here, there's great learning here, whatever. The next is community, right? And I say, oh, and it's I'm getting this content in a community of not necessarily like-minded, but senior level folks that sit in my seat, right?
Mhm.
But the third, which is the value prop to the individual that they might not articulate to justify the investment, is the connections, right? The connections that they're making that will last beyond potentially the current role, friendships. I don't want to call it networking because I think that dilutes what it really is, but they have their own friendships that they can do business with. Maybe they recruit one another, maybe they get on each other's boards, whatever it is. Is that a fair sort of recap, this content and community and connections?
Yeah, I think that's right, and, it captures some of those things I think I was describing,
Yes.
as, values. Those are good buckets to put them in, and they're Venn diagrams, so they all kinda
Yeah.
come together because the one wouldn't happen without the other, and, no one of them is sufficient perhaps, but all 3 make a really high, high value proposition because, the main problem for, these people is time. Well, it's not their main problem, but it's their main limitation. The biggest problem is the problem, but they limit it back time. And so, this is in some ways a very high return, high impact use of their time. And I do think that part of, call it a network or friendships or associations with people is maybe the highest value piece, although it's probably not the one you put on the explanation of why they should fund it.
Exactly.
But it's definitely valuable, and who knows, maybe some of them actually do put that down. I never see the rationale of, how they got this thing through accounting. But, one aspect of that, a good example, a tangible example is that one example is that a very, senior GC of one of the big insurance companies actually spent an entire session at one of our forums a year ago, going through a blow-by-blow account of what happened in the cyber attack they experienced, and
Mm.
she pulled no punches. It was, "Here are the 6 mistakes I made. Here's where the CO let us all down. This is where my, IT team didn't really."
You're not gonna read that in the journal, right? That's
You're
not
not
the
gonna read it any No, you're not gonna read it anywhere else, but it had, 20 other GCs on the edge of their seats and, but in a very, kind of conversational fashion. She wasn't giving a speech about this, she was talking about it, and various other GCs were saying, "So, why did you think that was a mistake, that thing you did?" And she said, "Well, I didn't think it was at the time, obviously, but now I realize that it was, and here's why." And so, it was that kind of dialogue, and I can pretty surely say that most of the GCs in the room took away something about how they would handle something like that in the future that they didn't know before. Another really
Well,
funny.
I wanna stay on that for a bit
Yeah,
because that's that goes in the unknown unknown, right? That's probably not even a question that they knew they should ask of,
right.
if I have a cyber attack or when there's a cyber attack on my entity, what are the 3 things I shouldn't do? Whatever, right? Like, it's not something they're thinking about. They're thinking about what should they do or what can they do to prevent it or whatever. But hearing from someone that was sort of a victim of that and how they dealt with it and how they were transparent enough to say, "Hey, here's what I would do differently next time," or "Here's what you should not do if you're in that seat when that happens."
Yeah. And also, it was a study in what I would call executive presence as well, because this GC was so forthright, so sort of straightforward about this, that as you know, it takes a lot of self-awareness and a capability to narrate a disaster scenario as if you were talking about the weather, and in a very very open way. Another interesting one was 2 GCs were having dinner at one of our sessions after one of our sessions, and one of them was leaving his role, and the other one, who's a very storied GC, had, I think at that point he had 7 GC seats under his belt, to talking about this move. And by the end of the evening, let's call him Dave, said to Jack, let's call him Jack, Dave, maybe you'd be interested in this role then, and that would save us all a lot of trouble. And Dave said, well, actually, I think I might like to do that. And so they probably went through a lot of HR hoopla, but essentially they cut that deal at dinner. And that would never have happened without having gotten together in the kind of community that you're describing.
Well, that's because of the trust that's built, the rapport that's built, etcetera, right? Where
Yeah.
you take a deal to sort of third base after having made the investment of being in these groups together and sharing stories, whatever, and getting to know one another. Any thoughts or advice that you would have for someone that's thinking about diving into this world of thought leadership? Although it wasn't necessarily your intent, that's where you've landed. Any thoughts to others that are out there that are thinking about how I might do this?
Well, I think kind of leading in the direction you were indicating, Peter, that simply sort of didactic thought leadership is still there, but I don't think it's
Sure.
as telling as it could be. Getting on at a podium and telling a bunch of
Right.
insurers what they should think about the future. But I think real thought leadership more and more is figuring out ways to create conversations and dialogue among people and create, yeah, networks or groups of like-minded people around that. It's that sort of, I guess, one way I think of it is, there's old-fashioned leadership by command and control, and then there's
Yes.
new leadership, which is through influence and persuasion. And so I think that thought leadership, good thought leadership, effective thought leadership today
Right.
involves
Right.
a certain amount of persuasion and leading from behind, doing other things that are not in your face. And, you know, I I think we do those things pretty well at Vanguard. It's not enough to just say, well, put a bunch of senior people in the room at small tables and magic will happen. It won't. I mean, it needs to
I
be
love that you separate it. I love what you said about the dialogue because I think there's a time and place for monologue, right? This is the world-renowned expert on something, something, something. Sit down, shut up, listen to what they have to say. That's like, this is a moment in time where you're gonna have this person in the room. But for most of us, most of the time, dialogue is a better means of communicating and learning and processing than, monologue. And I think people don't sort of understand that and think, "Well, I'm the expert. I always live in sort of this monologue. I speak," and, it's like the old E.F. Hutton commercials and everybody stops and listens. Not so much, and I love your group as a group of really high level, experienced, top-notch folks that in their own right, individually could be going out doing monologues all the time, but get them in a room, and they might all think they're the smartest person in the room, but at the end of the day, you wanna be in a room with smart people.
Yeah, let's just say you're one of the smartest. And so but I have in my own mind what I call the iPhone quotient, and by that I mean it's the percentage of time that people are not on their iPhone in a
What
meeting. And I'm pretty pleased with what I see, with our sessions, and it's nothing to do with me; it's with the quality of the discussion that these individuals are having. But also, it's interesting, there's a lot of pure I wouldn't call it pressure, pure leadership, right? If you're sitting at a table with 4 other general counsels and you're on your iPhone, it really is sending a message that you don't want to send about how important they are and whether you think they have anything useful to say. And you
Yeah.
don't want them doing that with you either. And so that's the sort of stick aspect of it. The carrot part of it is that I think there's a genuine feeling that, actually that stuff can wait. This is really worthwhile. As we all know, most of us go to conferences, unfortunately, with a pretty bad attitude, which is this is probably not going to be tremendously interesting. I'm going to, look up from time to time and listen to what might be interesting, but I've got work to do here. And then you
Yeah.
say social time for the water cooler and the drinks party. And the other 5 hours are kind of a limbo. And so I think
Right. Right.
a good
Right.
day. We're 5 hours of people off their iPhone.
Well, I love what you said earlier about, the scarcest resource these folks have is time, so they're giving of their time. But then underneath that, sometimes we think we're giving our time, but we're not really present. So I like that iPhone test of, yeah, okay, I've carved out 2 hours of my day to be here, but dot dot dot, I'm checking emails, I'm just, all these other things to actually be in the moment and be present, particularly in a group of, really smart people that I admire, that I respect, that I want to hear what they have to say. That's the I don't think there's a better version of the standing applause or call it what you will than you can give today.
Yeah, and that's where, looking back, I think perhaps the experience I had as a journalist with time comes into play in the sense that I have a pretty good bullshitometer. So I really, I kind of avoid or I discourage things that are really, if not stupid, at least time consuming or, bravado type stuff. And also, it's not just me leading sessions, but we have a practice of leading these sessions in a very journalistic manner. So,
Yeah.
there's no big wind up. There's a lot of provocative, but not nasty questions. And then we it's very easy to end up in a dialogue like you and me, perhaps at the front of the room, just talking away about what we're interested in. But
Sure.
we have a practice of making sure that, we look out in the room, we say, Lucy, that looked like it was a really interesting point for you. Why?
Oh, I love that. I love
But
that.
you do need a certain kind of mindset to do that,
Yeah.
and to realize that if you do it in the right way, you're not putting someone on the spot. You're recognizing how interesting they are, or we'll say things like, Peter, we'd like to come to you in about 5 minutes on this because I sense that you're really interested in it. Gives you a chance to collect your thoughts. You're not a
Yeah.
deer in the headlights. You were interested, but maybe you would feel a bit put upon if we just said, well,
Sure.
interested in your point of view. So there's I guess it's the usual story. It's like, ballet is supposed to look very easy. Well, we know that it's not.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. This has been great. I appreciate your time, Ken, and I appreciate
Likewise.
the conversation. Thank you for spending some time with me today.
That was terrific. Thanks again, Peter.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.